Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, where we talk about the Mandalorian cinematic universe, and primarily the Mandalorian from a mythic fairy tale deep dive perspective. And what I mean by that is that we use Joseph Campbell, Jungian psychology and symbolism and archetypes, and other mythic concepts to help dissect this very, very interesting show. And joining me to talk about season 3, episode 2, The Mines of Mandalore, is my good friend and yours, Alex Kane.
Thanks for having me back.
You're always welcome. The door is always open for you, Alex. You know that.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder, please like and subscribe on your app of choice, wherever you happen to find the show. You can also support the show by joining us on Patreon. It really helps run the show, as well as we have merch. Links are in the liner notes. That also helps support the show. So awesome. Let's dig into The Mines of Mandalore. This was written, of course, by Jon Favreau and directed by Rachel Morrison. Wow. Welcome, Rachel, to the Mandalorian and Star Wars universe.
Yes.
She's so impressive. I loved every moment of this episode.
Same. Yeah. Every time we sort of get a new voice in Star Wars, kind of like when, Rick or Bryce or Steph Green and Book of Boba, somebody sort of fresh and unexpected comes in and just does something really memorable. And that was definitely the case here. New top 3 episode for me, I would say.
She's most well known as the cinematographer for Black Panther.
Yeah. She sort of is known as a cinematographer, sort of historically, and so she's an old friend of Rick Famuyiwa, who has directed lots of our favorite episodes. Probably most famously, The Believer with Bill Burr.
So we can assume he maybe recruited her or said,
yeah.
Hey, yeah.
Probably been asking her for a while, maybe, one would imagine, and she's been busy with lots of stuff, but she shot his movie Dope way back in the day. Cute sort of indie coming of age teen comedy. So that had Shamik Moore, who's like the voice of Miles Morales in Spider-Verse, was the star of that. And then it had Tony Revolori of recent Willow fame, was like his buddy in that movie. Dope is a lot of fun. Like the reviews didn't really necessarily shower with praise when it came out, but I watched it, 5-7 years ago and loved it. Gorgeously shot. Hence so she got gigs doing like 24 episodes of the MTV reality series The Hills. She was DP on a Lady Gaga made for TV film. She worked on Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie, and then her big break was a movie called Fruitville Station, which is sort of a tragic true life drama starring Michael B. Jordan, and that was directed by Ryan Coogler, who then of course hired her to do Black Panther. Yeah. So she's got a very from Disney to Star Wars pipeline kind of history, but she's also comes from that sort of hip indie film world, which is cool. Yeah.
And it gives kind of like just a refreshing energy to this episode. It almost feels like, I really loved her work in this. And there was a lot of close-ups of people's faces, which is really nice. I mean, I know that's really hard with a puppet and a guy in a suit and a mask, but there was lots of moments that were really, really good with Bo and like how she looked, and we were with her in those moments. And this is what is described as the feeling camera. You experience the emotions of the character on screen. And I have to admit a little bit, I wanted to go back and really clearly document when Bo takes off her helmet and when she doesn't, but she really takes it off to have emotional moments. So that was quite significant, and I look forward to rewatching it again to really think about those things. But unfortunately, we're recording the same day it came out, and I didn't get a chance to do a third rewatch.
Yeah.
So these are the constraints of podcasters. Before we dig into the episode, there is a few things I did want to kind of lay the groundwork for because they're really important aspects to understanding this episode. I think when you watch it, you just sort of get it, right? You get that something important is happening and there's a significance and a weight to what's happening. And to me, that is the mythical symbolic language that is literally being threaded through the whole thing. How did it work for you, Alex?
I mean, to me, it felt like it tied a lot of things together that have been threaded through the show since, a lot of the way I watch Star Wars now is framed through talking about season 1 with you back in 2019.
Oh,
and just
really?
kind of, we sort of like sunk our teeth into Mando season 1 pretty hard. And so it was impossible not to see those connections kind of, being sewn back in. And it just felt like, it's all really starting to come together now in a way that, maybe season 2 was busy doing all these different things and laying the groundwork for spinoffs and stuff. And so, now this feels like, the Mandalorian, like we're really gearing up for big things.
Settled, and it feels like we're starting from a place, but let's not deny that Din has reverted on his journey. He is such a dumbass. Like, I love him,
sure.
But wow, is he dumb.
What I had in my notes too is like, this is the most sort of character development we've ever gotten for Bo specifically, I would say. And so
yes,
you get that kind of churning thing going on with those two where, I don't know, like, something gets flipped. And then also like great Grogu stuff in this episode, probably of necessity, but like the puppet.
I think it's important to point out that Grogu is further along on his like sort of life archetypes than Din currently is representing.
Yeah, he's got like 2 really big Grogu moments in here. It's sort of like a parent-child kind of look at things, and all kinds of fun stuff happens.
But who's the parent and who's the child in this? No, seriously, I'm asking you.
In this episode? Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, in this episode, I was thinking of it in terms of like Bo acting like the parent, but are you implying that you're not implying Grogu's the parent, right? Like,
no, but he's further along on his journey. He's certainly he's not in need of assistance.
Not regressing like Mando appears to be.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So I haven't really pinned down exactly where Grogu is. He certainly doesn't seem to need Mando, but he wants him, which is different, right?
Sure.
But Mando, Din Djarin, is totally in his maiden phase of the journey. And we talked about this last episode. The life archetypes come down to 6 main archetypes: maiden, hero, queen, king, crone, mage. And you basically follow them throughout your life. Maiden being childlike or teenage-like. Hero, you're out on your adventure. You have gotten past the need for parental monitoring or the need for parents to approve of you. Queen, you've taken on a need to become and nurture a family. King, you're leading something bigger than your family, right? Like a kingdom. Crone is you have died and you have to deal with the fact that you have died spiritually. And that typically aligns to like middle-aged people. And then mage, you're now powerful. A great example of a recent mage that we've seen in recent media was in Andor, when Marva inspired everybody. She was a crone,
the hologram.
And then she kind of became larger than life, and she became inspirational to those around her, right? And Din has actually reverted from being kind of a hero, almost a queen in previous episodes because of his connection to Grogu, to being very childlike. He has become dependent on his parental figure in the Armorer for his guidance on the directions on which he should go. And worse than that, in this episode, he's a full-on damsel, which is the passive aspect of the maiden.
Yeah, he's sort of tied to the train tracks in this episode or whatever. Like
several times.
Yeah.
And is hesitant to do things, is relying on other people to walk his journey for him, and also is doing what Mother Dearest tells him to do.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And we get some parents talk in this episode, which we can get into later, but we get some talk about like, oh, my parents, which is interesting.
He wants to be good for Mother. That's like a big sign that you're stuck in your maiden phase. And it's not even like you're on your own journey in your maiden phase. You are a damsel. You are stuck in this idea. Like, think Rapunzel from Tangled. Right? Mother knows best, child. Can't you imagine the armorer almost saying that to him?
Sure. Yeah, he's like in that phase of wanting to impress the parents and be the golden child.
Yeah.
And Bo is the rebellious tomboy teenager who has no interest whatsoever in what her parents, hypothetically would think, or so she, claims. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I actually have a different theory on where Bo is at, but okay. It's good. Joseph Campbell actually talks about this from a psychoanalytical perspective. So what the archetypes represent at this stage for Din, being a maiden, is an impotence to put forward or to put off the infantile ego with its sphere of emotional relationships and ideals. One is bound by the walls of childhood. The father and the mother stand as threshold guardians. You become fearful of punishment and fail to make passage through the doors and come to the birth in the world without. So the world without is always the unknown. It's the underworld, right? He's not doing what his soul is telling him to do, his joy. He's doing what his parental figure is telling him to do. And you really have to deny and get around those threshold guardians. You have to go on your own journey. Why is he always getting stuck? Why does the sword not work for him? Why are these things happening to him? Because he's walking somebody else's path.
Yeah. Like not trusting sort of like the inner voice, right? Like the George Lucas is like the romantic guy of all romantics. And so like when Kylo Ren is out on the bridge with his dad in The Force Awakens, the right thing to do would be to listen to your heart or whatever. But instead it's like, well, what's Snoke need me to do here? And so it's really a dangerous moment when you're listening to external voices all the time instead of saying what does this make me feel? What do I actually want to do in my heart or whatever?
So this is important because I hope that Din, and we're not done this journey, obviously, right? It stops kind of halfway through. I think this is really important for Din to realize maybe some of the aspects of what he's doing, but he's full on a damsel in this episode. You can see it. It's literally there in all of the what happened symbolism. Right?
Yeah. Not only is he kind of he's rendered useless at one point, and then at another point he's the world just sort of falls away beneath him, and he's sort of powerless to do anything.
Is he actually doing anything in this episode? That's a question for you to keep in mind.
Very interesting.
Okay, so this is obviously a quest for rebirth, but who's the rebirth for? I mean, hopefully Din in the end. This is a quest for Bo.
Yeah. She's sort of dragged out into the into adventure, which in last episode she had no interest in.
Last episode, Din's like, hey, come with me on this adventure. She's like, nah, that's a denial of the call, right?
Yeah.
And she's the one who answers the supernatural herald being Grogu. She's the one who goes in and defeats the monsters. She's the one that goes and dives to the depths to be reborn. There's also some really interesting heroine's journey things happening if you kind of play them kind of off sync of each other, in that Bo is currently suffering from the false boon of success. She did everything she was supposed to do to lead the Mandalorians, and they ran off on her. And she's left with nothing but dust. She played the world. She played by the man's world, the man's rules, and left with nothing.
Yeah, she's got a castle, and it's a pretty castle, but it's empty, and she's got no purpose until she hears, the pretty Pedro Pascal is in trouble,
She doesn't know what he looks like.
Oh, yeah, true. Sorry.
There's some other really interesting mythical things happening, but I'm going to save them for when we get into the episode. I also find it interesting. This episode actually came out in at the same time as the Jewish holiday and sort of celebration of Purim, which has some, associations with saving the Jewish people from annihilation. So there's like kind of a parallel there to the Mandalorians. And there's a big theme of protection from harm from others in this episode. And also Purim has some kind of common threads where there's a tradition of kids dressing up because of the masquerading that happened during Purim to protect the people. And so there's a tie to the fact that like Din continues to want to be in the mask, right? He is still masquerading as a Mandalorian. Not that he isn't one, but that he doesn't see himself truly as one without the mask, if that makes sense.
He's sort of taking like what Campbell would talk about as like rituals. He's taking them very literally, like the armorer would expect her tribe to do, and Bo respects them in kind of more of a, probably the way somebody like Jon Favreau or anyone with like any kind of religious life whatsoever, tends to think of their religion in like the sort of 21st century where, it's not like the only thing they have going on, like Mando and Grogu with like the Mandalorians and the Jedi and all that, like is a pretty big deal, but like to a sort of healthy, well-rounded person, they've got religion and they've got other things going on too. So it's interesting.
Transubstantiation is like the typical thing that happens in, Catholicism when, the body and blood of Christ becomes the wine and the bread becomes the body and blood of Christ, right? So they is that literally happening, or is it on a figurative level, or is it both? There is a lot of that from a faith perspective that's going on with Din, right? There's some really interesting moments in this episode. I don't know. There's a lot going on. It really makes me happy.
It's really rich.
And I have joined the ship of Bo Din or Din Bo. I kind of have gotten aboard with Din Bo because it sounds like himbo, and that's our boy. And I love it so much. And there's a lot of mythical stuff happening to kind of say, interesting, they could go this way. Certainly the door is open. And yeah, Jon Favreau has written romantic stuff before. So come through for me, John. Come through for me.
Yeah, it's a very like Reylo thing that happens in this episode with her using his sword as a very Last Jedi moment. And then, just the idea that like they're kind of the only two people in the galaxy who sort of, at least in the universe of this show, where a lot of the other Mandos are kind of, not like front and center. They get each other in a way that, Grief Karga does not understand the Mandalorian experience, or the, Peli Motto or whoever, And
she cares enough about him to go to a cursed planet or a toxic planet.
Yeah, it's like maybe Christmas isn't her favorite holiday, but she gets that Christmas is meaningful to her sort of quote unquote family member, like that kind of thing. I happen to love Christmas, but it's that kind of thing where she respects him, even if she sort of feels a little differently about the rituals.
Yeah, and it kind of goes down to the difference between the two of them in this episode is, Din kind of has wholly existed on this like quote unquote spiritual level, right? And Bo has existed on this very rational level. Din is reminded that he is actually flesh and blood in this episode in a very literal way. And Bo has been reminded of the importance of the rituals.
That's really interesting you say that. A lot of my notes are about, so if you have this one person who's sort of like balanced and healthy, and Bo, even though she's kind of like static and needs that call to adventure. And then if Mando is kind of overly spiritual and forgetting about what's in front of him. You also have this creature that we'll get to, which is like the other extreme of like pure material life, which is like the most Star Wars thing I've ever seen. And I just loved it so much. It's like so Star Wars.
It's even super mythical. I can't wait to talk about it.
It's so great.
It's so good. Okay, so let's get into the episode. And actually, we have to start with the previously on parts, unfortunately, because it's important to reminder. But we get the solid reminder of the armorer talking about when the mythosaur rises, so will the Mandalorian people. We can't like go further than that, just to say, because now this is like a real thing that people might actually believe in, or at least the armorer may, right? And then we also get the flashback to Bo-Katan's denial of the call, which was really, really important as a setup for the episode. But we actually start with Pelimoto.
Oh, yeah. So you get this sort of, speeder race event in Mos Eisley, which is like a very, I don't know, George Lucas kind of thing.
It's Bunta Eve. This is the event that Anakin took place in.
Oh, is it Bunta? Okay.
It's Bunta Eve.
It's like all the like bougie, like rich, like Rhodians and their fancy outfits come out, and they've got fireworks and fancy cars.
But do you know what Bunta Eve is about? I Wikipedia'd it.
all I know is like the pod racing stuff. So I guess I don't know like the cultural significance.
It's in celebration of the Hutt. Who ascended to godhood.
So not Jabba.
Not Jabba.
Or Jabba.
But
okay,
a
cool.
Hutt.
Nice.
I'm obsessed. This is great. Okay. So she's basically running a scam, right? And okay. Pelimoto is like our George Lucas insert into Star Wars. A mechanic has his hair, like it talks the truth, and quite literally will always tell Din what he needs, not necessarily what he wants. So how can we meta interpret the selling the speeder back to the same person? Well, we're going to get fresh coat of paint on the same lessons and values as Star Wars and get it back to us.
Yeah. It's kind of like George selling like his empire to Disney, but he maintains like an office at Skywalker Ranch, and like he goes to the sets and hangs out with Dave and John. Like it's kind of that thing. And yeah, like you said, just the adoration for Grogu and the sort of grease monkey, hot rodder aspect is so fun. And the pit droids feel very George.
A conspiracy theory about Pelimoto that she's George Lucas's insert, or at least homage to George Lucas, right? But we get this like really great scene where she's scamming other people, but she never scams Din, right? Even though she does sell him a terrible droid, she offers to tune up his engine for free and, basically cut him a deal to like make sure the droid can be brought. Okay, what is important about this droid? Din says what he needs. He needs a droid that can do spelunking. Okay. All right, spelunking. You mean cave climbing? Like basically you're going into a cave and you're going deep, deep, deep into a catabasis. And he specifically says, I need a droid to explore ahead of me. From a hero's journey perspective, that's not great, right? That means somebody else is walking your journey for you.
He's afraid of the danger.
He's afraid. He's a damsel. He's a child.
It's good stuff.
Isn't that great?
I'm trying to think of like what Luke Skywalker, if he had that moment, but he just says like, I'm not afraid. And Yoda says, you will be. You will be.
Yeah. So Pelly's like, okay, why don't you take this R5 unit? He'll do what you need him to do bare minimum, but he's not going to walk your journey for him. He literally cannot. Like, so Pelly gives him what he needs, not necessarily what he wants. She's like the best, like, mentor. Like, she's great. I love her so much.
There's this weird sort of like meta implication with this droid, which She says something like when he got back from serving the rebellion.
Yeah.
And we know that this is like literally the droid that like was purchased by Luke Skywalker's family and then like blew its motivator.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, like, are there all these like rumors that, oh, that's like a droid that was owned by Luke Skywalker and like he sort of steals R2D2's valor? Because I would like love that. Anyway, yeah, there's all this weird like implication with that.
But that's not the droid. He didn't actually need IG, but he was afraid. He's afraid to go into the dark.
Yeah.
He's afraid to transform. He's afraid to do what he actually needs to do because he's a damsel. He's a maiden. He's actually afraid to go against the armorer. He's afraid to admit what he actually wants, which is interpersonal connection.
Yeah, IG's the one who did all the like protecting and sacrificing really in the season 1 finale, and he's sort of like trying to resurrect him again so he can just continue to be his
you
proxy.
Sacrifice and you nurture baby for me.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so good. But okay, so he's like, fine, I'll take that. He agrees like relatively quickly for a guy who really hates droids.
Yeah. He's like, whatever, it beats like risking anything myself. So
yeah, exactly. Like literally just rolling over and letting it happen. And they head to Mandalore and he shows Grogu the different planets. And it's literally like, and this one I was born on. Oh yeah, Bo-Katan is right there. See, she's right there. And that's Mandalore.
It's like sort of laying the groundwork for Grogu's competence to be able to rescue him later. So it sort of seems like exposition, but and there's like also this like Mando cultural thing where he's like, oh, a Mandalorian has to be good with maps, gotta be able, which is funny because Pelly jokingly kind of jabs him and calls him grandpa early in the episode.
Yeah, because he's asking for old technology.
And then with the maps, I was like, that's kind of a grandpa trait there too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
funny.
He's from Concordia, which of course showed up in the Clone Wars or in Rebels with the protectors of Concord Dawn. Concordia is, of course, a moon of Mandalore. And this makes me like go a little, I was a little confused. I actually thought he wasn't actually like Mandalorian.
It's weird how like the foundling stuff was sort of like new information when the show started, I believe. And so I think he's talking about after his parents were killed and he was like adopted by the Mandalorians, possibly. But yeah, it's a little vague.
I mean, I think they're personally going to give him a Hidden Prince backstory.
Oh, that would be cool. Like maybe like he was one kind of Mandalorian and then the Children of the Watch took him after.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Anastasia type thing or something.
I mean,
I don't know that story.
They're giving me the vibes of he's got hidden royalty.
I like this. I haven't heard this theory before.
This is brand new as of this episode. So
hell yeah. I like it.
Why point out that he is not just a foundling of the Clone Wars, if not to actually make him hidden royalty? Yeah.
Well, even in my notes for this specific episode, I talked about the creature that we'll get to being sort of a phantom of the Clone Wars. So, and he has that fear of machines that's so who Din is. All the signs are kind of like all that stuff is continuing to be very, very relevant. Yeah. Even till now.
I mean, why do you go to the dark but to deal with all your shadows, right? We dealt with a lot of shadows with IG, and I think he felt a lot of comfort with that, so he wanted his protector droid to come with him, the one that was like on his side and that he had already sort of come to terms with. But that's like a cheaty way. Like you can't do that. You gotta deal with your stuff. Unfortunately, he's like a baby damsel right now, so it's really, really cute. But
he's John Connor and he wants his Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator to protect him.
Yeah.
It all goes back to Terminator, apparently, we've decided.
And so they enter into the clouds of the planet, and of course this is like a massive sign that they're going through a threshold. It's completely different from the outside to the inside. They go in, there's like storms, and then suddenly it looks really nice on Mandalore. I mean, it's destroyed, but looks fine.
To me, it looks like if Exegol had the sun shining. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's kind of half Exegol, half Octo.
How do you know that you've entered into the unknown or the world without, as Joseph Campbell said from the quote that I said earlier? Oh, well, we can't communicate with the rest of the galaxy right now. There's communication problems.
We've lost all communications. Also, it's funny, in Bo's castle, it was sort of like raining. And then we get to this planet and we hear like thunder in the distance or something. Storm's coming.
They land, they release the droid. Grogu's super worried about R4, which made my heart melt because I love it when people experience empathy for droids. It's a great thing about Star Wars. And this is like really important because like you're really not supposed to let other people walk your journey for you, right? This is kind of what I think Peli was trying to show Din. Or at least what the writers are telling us, because he quickly gets into trouble, R5, and Din has to go after him. And so there's this huge like, okay, lock yourself in your pod, Grogu. I'm going to go and seal my helmet and go and check and then figure out if it's actually toxic here. Grogu's like, okay. So he goes and he fights the monsters, and it's really interesting because these are like, you know, threshold guardians, right? Like as soon as he enters the cave, they're there to fight him and say, no, you can't go any further, right? They're like trolls with green eyes.
Like they got those like 4 green eyes, I think, and tusks.
Yeah. And the look of the cave from the inside is also green. Why? Green is significant. It's growth. It's Grogu, right? It represents his joy, right? Your joy is the thing that guides you through your journey when you don't know where to go. And he's like, green. Because he's running away from his instincts, which is to nurture and to love. And this is why he continuously becomes a damsel in this episode. And the sword still fights him.
Interesting. The sword?
The sword fights him.
The Darksaber.
The Darksaber fights him whenever he tries to use it.
Yeah. You brought up the color green, and I was like, we were talking about Arthurian stuff last time, and I was like, The Green Knight, one of my favorite movies. I was like, what does green say in that movie? And it's like, we could just go all night talking about that probably, but yeah, it's like, it's that sort of double-edged color of like, it represents like all these good things, and you know, and then it also kind of
represents the inevitability of nature, right? Death and life are interconnected, and you can't stop those things.
Interesting. Yeah. It's sort of like, greed, but like, the ultimate, you know, nature will always be the kind of the victor or whatever when you fight against nature or whatever. So I guess that's what those trolls with the green eyes are.
You can't stop death. Right? You can't stay green forever.
Yeah. This episode does go there for sure.
Yes.
It's all connected. This is a really great episode. Like we could talk about this episode for hours and hours.
They test, they test the air. It's okay for both of them. So that's great. And Mando is like, Bo-Katan was right. Mandalore isn't cursed.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I just feel like patting him on the head.
What is it? Pure of heart, dumb of ass or whatever. It's like he gets like the not cursed and the not magical are two separate things, which is kind of fun that, Bo has not really made up her mind about. And he's sort of like, I don't know. It's sort of like the mine is cursed and the waters are magic. And we sort of unpack what that all means by the end of this.
Yeah. And he gets Grogu, which is his instinct to do. He doesn't want to leave his son behind. But it's also important because Grogu represents his joy, his guiding light in the darkness. And they literally enter into this cavern, which anytime that you're kind of going into an underworld journey or into the earth, it is a representation of being in the earth being mean like Gaia means that you're going inside of her. You're going back into the womb. And when they enter, they kind of see the civic center underneath, and it looks like bones of the city, sort of like what you see when you see like destroyed buildings in like post-apocalyptic movies.
Yeah.
And they go down to the mine. So they go down this big hole and they kind of like go down. He uses his jetpack. And of course, Grogu just has his little floating pod. And they're in the darkness. And another sign that you're in your damsel stage, right? Your archetype, you're stuck in this passive maiden phase, is that you are constantly being hunted by a predator. And we see sort of this like thing that is like stalking them, and Grogu notices it, but Din has like literally no idea that he is being hunted.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that, Grogu being more aware of it. That's awesome. It totally makes sense.
And then we run into this like spider-like droid that captures Din very easily. There's this one line where Din says, all these waters must flow to the living water. So it's sort of like the idea like they all flow down, and if we just kind of follow the water, we will get there, which is like maybe the first instinctual thing he sort of says this episode. Mm. Every other line is sort of driven by fear to this point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the image of the river Styx from like season 1's finale again.
Yeah.
Except like he's almost sort of he doesn't have IG-11 like doing that for him. I guess he's sort of venturing out a little bit.
So I love that
not metaphorically.
This droid has like spider parts. It kind of looks like a spider because it's like, oh, you're trapped, Din. That's the big symbol. You're trapped. You're not progressing forward the way that you need to be progressing forward. And then it like gets out of its like spider mech, and it's this like fleshy but also mechanical monstrosity. It sort of reminded me of Maul in the underworld of the garbage planet from the Clone Wars with his spider legs. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like a mix of that and like General Grievous.
Yeah, there's like a lot of General Grievous, which is like kind of like the tie to the Clone Wars concept for Din.
Yeah.
Fear of the droids.
Sort of both those characters taken to like the furthest extreme, and yeah, it's sort of like one fleshy eye in a skull, like basically just the eye.
You pointed out the eye. So what is it also mythically? He's a Cyclops.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? Which shows multiple things, but specifically this ties to Odysseus and Polyphemus, where Polyphemus was the very famous Cyclops that captured Odysseus and his crew on the way back from the Trojan War. And he trapped them in his cave with his sheep, and every night would eat 2 of the crew. There's this like consumption idea, right? And this Cyclops is not only a Cyclops, but also a shapeshifter, which I'm super excited to talk about later because we see kind of the aspects of it. But he gets him and he plugs him into kind of this like contraption, and he starts to siphon blood out of him.
Yeah. Vampirism, basically. Yeah.
And so he is a shapeshifter because shapeshifters are often vampires. They're werewolves or witches, and they sort of represent this idea that our hero needs a catalyst for action, and that change is possible, right? Change is possible. You can transform yourself. And so he's a shadow of the transformation. What I want to tie to the Odysseus and Polyphemus stuff is actually for when Bo comes in, because he represents something for Bo that is different than what he represents for Din, which is that Din, he is his captor because he is a damsel. And for Bo, it's something different.
Interesting. Odysseus's wife was like captive, right? Or did she test him with the arrow thing? Like she didn't recognize him, right? Is that what it was?
She didn't recognize him when he came home because she had all these suitors there. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Got me thinking about the Odyssey. So.
Of course. And it's also just to remind us we don't know what we think we know what our journey is, and we don't. We don't know what's supposed to happen next.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Psychologically. Grogu is like trying to protect him and fails. And so he's like, go get Bo-Katan. Okay. So this has effectively become a lost husband story.
Yeah.
Because some stuff happened. So let's talk about lost husbands real quick. Lost husbands represent psychologically the desire to seek the wounded masculine in ourselves and heal it. The fact that literally Din Djarin is stuck in the underworld and he offered a proposal. Remember when I pointed that out last time?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Last time he was like, hey, Bo, join me. And she's like, nah. And he's like,
I'll sit here.
Well, the key to this is that some sort of taboo was broken. There was an offer. There was a rule set, right? And she said no to him, which is fine. But it also means that he was actually very important to her. My favorite lost husband story is Psyche and Eros, which is, of course, the story of love and the soul, and how his chosen wife ended up sort of piercing him with or burning him with fire. And so she had to go and eventually go to the underworld and atone and do a whole bunch of tasks and trials to get him back and to kind of atone to her, to his mother, which is, of course, Aphrodite. There's tons of lost husband stories in folklore and in fairy tale and, of course, myth. This is also Din needing to be rescued by the feminine. Because the dark feminine has him right now, right? So he needs a different set of sort of feminine archetypes in his psyche to help him. And Bo could easily be that as well.
I love how too, like the sort of Star Wars fan culture aspect of this is that episode 9 happened, and then all these sort of Star Wars fans who do fanfic or art or whatever were all immediately like, well, Ben's just lost somewhere and Rey has to go find him. And then like Willow, that's like literally kind of what they set up. It's like the plot for like Willow season 2 and 3, it seems. And now we get this. So it's just kind of
there was lost husband stuff like throughout, which is great in Willow.
Oh, well, yeah. And I mean, Return of the Jedi, even just all this stuff. But
she goes to the underworld to go and save her husbands, Leia and Han, right? Yeah,
Leia, yeah.
And it's a metaphor for needing to redeem these aspects or heal these aspects within ourselves, right? Bo's been trying to do things this very like hyper masculine way her whole life, and there's a lot of conversation when she rescues him and ongoing about nurturing and about caring and about her childhood. It's really interesting.
Yeah, when I thought of the mines being like the basically the journey of the underworld, like the Ishtar and Nana thing or whatever, like rescuing a family member from the underworld, I was like, so I went to Inanna, on like Wikipedia, and it's funny that, she was sort of the Mesopotamian equivalent of Venus. So it was sort of like, goddess of love and beauty, but also fertility and also war. So that idea of like the well-rounded, the healthy individual who is sort of a little bit more complete than the so-called hero who, is trapped in the spider's web, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Very helpless in this episode, Din Djarin is. And so, our Grogu, our supernatural herald, comes to her and she immediately sets off. They leave Din's ship there, which is really interesting, and they take her ship. So now it's her journey.
Interesting. Yeah, because you really notice that when like Grogu is in the ship and he calls to her, and then they move to her ship, like your sort of logical brain as you're watching the episode the first time, you're kind of thinking like, I was like, oh, they're getting in her ship, weird. And then you say that, it's like, oh, totally, because of the symbolic reason is always the important one in Star Wars. I love that.
And Grogu and her journey in, and they're careful, right? But Bo-Katan, this is a Campbellian thing. All women are the goddess, right? They might not always look like the goddess, and you might not ever actually see all the aspects of them, but the goddess herself just needs to find herself within, if that makes sense, right? So you think about Campbell always talks about the heroine doesn't need to go anywhere to actually unveil the power. The hero needs to journey, and the hero needs to find things, but the heroine is the goddess who just needs to be revealed. So the journey is always psychological and internalized for women from a Campbellian perspective. So Bo is already a goddess. She has the owl on her mask. She is wisdom. She is rationality, right? And what she needs to find inside of herself is a remembrance of the nurturing that is also part of her, which Din represents in spades. In spades, he does, except he's lost right now, right? He's lost in the underworld.
Yeah, he's like the dad who's not doing a good job of being a dad right now, basically.
Yeah.
It's so cool how, like, she's just so cool and graceful in this episode when she's like sort of delving in, like flying down, like she's very Clint Eastwood. Like she is the Mandalorian, as we would, point out the title. And also, it's funny how the light switch flips from like, oh God, this asshole again. Like, I'm going to tell him to get lost. And then Grogu says he's in trouble. And it's like, boom, she cares. It's like such a change. And so that's that nurturing you're talking about, I suppose.
Yeah. Caring about others, having compassion for others, right? That's Star Wars. And both her and Grogu have this like quick moment where Grogu's like showing her the way in, right? And she turns on a light at the same time as he does. So they're bringing light to the darkness, right? They represent the opportunity to illuminate all of these shadows, which is really cool.
Strength in numbers and all that, right? Like,
they jump in the hole, and I'm obsessed with Grogu's little flappy ears as he's like going down. I don't know. It was a great moment.
The puppet has never looked better than in this episode. Like, it's such a good, Grogu performance in all those, however that gets done. I look forward to. So it seems like it was a lot of practical puppet in this episode.
Yeah, the puppet was amazing in this. It felt full of soul.
Yeah.
And she says, "I know you're frightened, but I need you to guide me to him." Oh, how did this make you feel? What is this? What is this for you?
I don't know. I that line didn't catch me. I guess I was sort of just engrossed in that moment. But I mean, we talk about how Grogu is like, he is the past and the future, basically. Like he's sort of the egg that, he comes from the distant past and he goes to the distant future. And
he is
I don't know.
Healing, right? He is Din's joy, right? He's the thing that Din cares about the most, right? So he represents something, but because Bo cares about what Din cares about, she needs Grogu to guide her to him.
Sure. Oh, okay.
Right? Because how do you get through the darkness? You seek joy.
Sure. Yeah.
And then they turn on their lights. I love this so much. It's just entirely my thing, completely.
Yeah. The sort of like big macro thing that's happening here, I would say, I would venture to guess, it is like the idea that all these Mandalorians are, they would be stronger together, whereas like this, creature down in the dark, this spider cyclops thing, is sort of a very Sith-like existence where, one or two max, three's company, right? Like with the Sith, I'll tolerate this Kylo Ren guy, but I'm the Dark Lord and I'm the only one who matters. That's what the dark side is. So it's kind of like,
it's very lonely and isolating, and
a lot of good symbolism here.
That's where Din is stuck currently, right?
Yeah.
Alone. And she tells him stories about Jedi and Mandalorians used to fight together, and so she's like bonding with Grogu. It's really cute.
Yeah. It's sort of like, oh, I don't know what that other person told you, but and then she's kind of learning that her and Din are not all that different, whereas in earlier episodes she's like, oh, you're a child of the Watch, they're a brainwashed cult and I don't want nothing to do with you slime balls, and here it's like, oh, like in our hearts we believe. That's sort of like a thing that gets bandied around in politics or debate class or what have you, like that sort of college debate idea of we all essentially want the same things as human beings. So if we can just get to that, that's where the change and stuff happens.
Kind of talks about how she wishes that Mandalorians could get over that, like what were they even fighting for? They weakened themselves by not being together.
Oh, right. That's where I got that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She says it. Yep.
Yeah. So we see that, Din has become very weak because of the blood, right, being taken from him. And of course, he's being weakened because of being trapped within the metal, like he literally is. There's a metaphor for you. And this bug sort of Cyclops shapeshifter, they fight, and of course Bo kicks its ass with ease.
Yeah.
She's so good with the shield and the sword, because defense and attack. A balanced person. So what can we say Bo is? Bo is truly in her heroine or hero phase, right? She's a hero in the life archetypes phase, right? She is the hero of this particular episode.
Yeah.
And before, she was kind of a coward, right? She didn't want to go on the adventure. She was kind of in a negative, passive archetype. And it took Grogu, who, heroic enough, didn't need Dad to go and save himself, went and got her, right? So they're trying to pull Din out of this childlike phase, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But she was able to fight off this monster, and she kills the one version of him, and then he crawls away in a little bug-like other creature. And it kind of goes to the idea, like, just because you think you've cut off the head of one thing doesn't mean it can't go and infect something else, right?
Reminded me of The Thing. It's like the image of The Thing where the head falls off the body and walks away with spider legs. And of course, Dean Cundey, who shot that movie, did the last episode. So there's all this connective tissue between...
Maybe they're talking.
Love it.
They eventually do end up getting rid of the Cyclops eye shapeshifter bug thing, which was good. And they are settled in around a fire, and she cooks him pog soup.
Yeah, and what'd she say? Like, I can't believe you've never had it, like that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, like every Mandalorian, when you were as small as he was, pointing to Grogu, has had this. And this reminds me of the bone broth that they had in the first season that Grogu had, right? The idea that there's like a need for nurturing. So she nurtures Din like a mother in this.
Interesting.
Right? She's caring for him. So I think very much she might even be progressing from hero to even queen, which is all about family and protecting those around you. I'm not 100% sure if she's there yet, but she's progressing. And there's kind of like an interesting philosophical conversation that happens where he's like, but without the creed, where are we? What does this even matter without the creed? And I love this little moment where Grogu glares at Bo when he's talking. Like, my dad's talking. He knows what he's talking about.
He's a smart guy, my dad. Every child thinks like their dad is like the smartest, everything is gospel.
It was a really warm and like nurturing moment, this one, like where they're like just healing up. It's very D&D, like, let's take a long rest.
Yeah, I put in my notes that this episode is basically like a Skyrim dungeon. So yeah, same idea, D&D, just like we got to go underground and like fight some trolls and I love it. This might be my favorite episode.
And so Din's like, okay, I got to keep on going. And Bo's like, okay, I'll guide you, because he needs protecting because he's a damsel.
Yeah.
And they enter into the mines, which kind of looks like the front of Bo's castle, sort of.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It's interesting that, when we meet Mando, he's like this bounty hunter guy who's all resourceful. And we think like, oh, he could find like anything, anywhere on any planet. And she's just like, oh, you're definitely going to need my help. So you're looking at it from like that mythological journey point of view where he literally needs her.
Does it make sense without the mythological journey? That's my question, because I translate Jon Favreau, I think, pretty well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, because to me, I was just like, well, she just wants to hang out with him. But yeah, I think you're right that it's also the fact that, on
he's
that metaphorical level, he really does sort of need her right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And they end up, talking about her childhood, that she was a princess, right? That she knows these things because of being raised here, being born here. This is hers, and then she talks about how her father believed that the rituals were important, even if he didn't necessarily believe them literally, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that gave Din a fair amount of comfort, that her father wanted her to understand the rituals, even if it wasn't quote unquote real for him, that the rituals themselves were important for her family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, he says something like, oh, I'm sorry, like he didn't get it or whatever. Or like that it didn't make him proud or something, right? And then she's like, oh no, it did. To stress the importance of this stuff in her family.
Yeah, exactly. And then, my father was a great man. He died defending Mandalore. And Din just turns and almost robotically says, this is the way.
Yeah.
Which is dude, you're in a cult. No, I mean, how do you understand that death is part of life, right? We have rituals to help us understand these things. And there is a certain amount of horror about living that, at any point you could die, mm-hmm. and you still have to, or people around you could die, and you still have to figure out how to live. That's really hard. And if you have a ritual or a concept or a philosophy or secret stories that help you process all of those complexities of living, it does make you stronger. They head down and they find the living waters, which looks like a pool. And I like that there's even a plaque. Yeah, that was great. And she starts to read the plaque. She's like, I want you to have the best experience on our little date to the living waters. And so she starts reading the plaque, and he's like, I'm going straight in. He takes off his weapons, but not his armor, and he goes in and he starts to walk in, and she's like, oh, okay, you're doing it, I guess. And he goes down, and I am not surprised. He's probably wearing over 100 pounds of Beskar.
Oh, so yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to work out some of the sort of pseudo physics of this episode in my head.
So this is literally happened. So my dad used to fight in the Society for Creative Anachronism, which means he wore armor, and he would do reproduction fighting, medieval fighting. Nice. One time he fell. We were at an event that was outside, and he fell into a creek face down, couldn't get up, and almost drowned.
Oh, Jesus.
And the creek was a foot deep.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
This is real. Legit, don't fall into water if you're wearing armor. But this, from a symbolic perspective, is a death.
Oh, sure.
And Bo goes in and helps him be reborn, as we see the mythosaur, right? So both of them do it. So this is key. She is also reborn. She goes in voluntarily, and she does it because she cares about him. So you see the difference in the archetypes. She is being reborn as somebody who is a queen, and he is being reborn because she helps him get out of that phase. Really cool stuff.
She's like, I can fix him.
I can fix it. Well, my husband is lost in the underworld and needs to experience a rebirth. That's right. And then they see the mythosaur as they go up, right? So the soul of the mythosaur, the Manadalore, sleeps with the mythosaur. And I wrote down, life finds a way.
I just like that she like calls his faith in the myth of like the Mandalorian people like adorable in this sort of condescending way, but she actually does adore him, I think, on some level. And then as he slips, we see, like the myth is like literally
underneath the surface.
Right there. It's right there. Yeah.
Waiting to be reborn. Yeah.
Which in the first episode, I had mentioned like the mythosaur symbol was like really prominent in the armorer's like forge area. But I thought it was going to be like some Boba Fett thing. Like, they're foreshadowing Boba's going to be like a big deal. Like, no, it was like the literal mythosaur that we've been building up for 3 seasons is right there.
There's a lot of Terminator in this episode.
Oh,
I don't know. Just with the creature and like the crawling and the horror aspect of the eye and stuff. I don't know. There was a lot. Yeah.
Well, yeah, sort of like the spider tank form was like a proto Terminator looking thing. Like we could get into Terminator lore and we'll be here all night. But I do love how much the Terminator is threaded through this show. Clearly it's something that meant a lot to Favreau at some point, and he's using it because we see it all the time with like the Dark Troopers and the Night of 1,000 Tears and all that stuff.
So I do want to say, like, that moment when they were kind of camped out, it really does classify as a lap of the goddess moment for Din. He is being healed. He is being protected by the goddess in his life at that moment, which is Bo, and being given sort of wisdom of old that he wasn't aware of. Being that it also happened under the ground, it's also symbolic that they were also sharing a meal, i.e. having a union of sorts, right?
Kind of like Boba and Fennec.
Yeah. This is a mythical marriage of sorts underground. And the fact that she uses his sword being a phallic metaphor, this is all in the womb. There's a lot of sexual symbolism just straight up across this episode.
Yeah, we see Rey use Kylo's red saber in The Last Jedi, and then of course in Rise of Skywalker you get her passing hers to him and all this stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of, I don't know. That's what it made me think of, I guess. Also, the music that plays when she's like kicking all kinds of ass is like the best music we've heard in the show like today. It was so good. Really great little, it's very brief, but like when she's fighting like the spider tank, I call it, I don't know, like that's so good. The music really kicks in.
Bo rediscovered nurturing in this episode, cared for others, fed a loved one, multiple loved ones. Of course, she cares for both Grogu, but who do you also feed? You feed your husband, right? Or you feed your spouse. You feed your loved ones, right? She also grew to appreciate pieces of herself that she had probably not thought of for years. The love of her father, the rites and traditions that she had long forgotten. I'm going to use it. What is this show? Good job, Jon Favreau.
I love this episode. It's so good. And there's this thing that Favreau does, and we kind of poke fun at it and take it for granted, but I think here it really works, which is like he always talks about like taking the underdog, like background characters that nobody cares about, and like make them a big deal. The fact that R5D4 is the droid here is meaningful, I feel. And then because it was sort of like that refusal of the call moment in A New Hope with that droid. And then, you get Mando taking off his weapons the way that Luke does in Empire Strikes Back. And I don't know, there's stuff happening that is not just coincidence. It's like very meaty little beats. And I love your Peli Motto theory about how she's George Lucas, because in my notes I have, from Favreau's point of view, like she's kind of like his good luck charm, maybe like he keeps bringing her back. And all I can think about is how she was James Caan's secretary in Elf, and Elf is like, his sort of mainstream breakout hit,
George
the reason that he's
self-insert. Or
homage. It's so good. Yeah. It's like where the alchemy happens, like the George Favreau alchemy, if that's a thing. It's like is Amy Sedaris. And I don't know. I love it. And then Grogu, meaningfully, she thinks the Grogu's first word
is Peli.
When he is Peli in this episode. We don't quite know, but it does sound like it.
I couldn't tell. But either way, it's like it always, whenever Peli holds Grogu, it always reminds me of that picture of George Lucas holding the puppet.
Yes. So when you said the Peli is George thing earlier, I was like, she's right because of that picture. Yes.
I've said this for years.
Yeah.
Like since
she was introduced in. Was she introduced in that episode that you thought was like George Ghost wrote it?
Yeah.
Because it was the Filoni episode. Yeah. Wow.
The one where they race through the desert, everybody has names.
Yeah.
And there's like the super interesting like mythic talk from Peli.
Yeah. And my theory was, this is like Luke and Vader having a father relationship that they never had. And then you're like, you got it. You said like you thought the same thing. And she's George. You're right. I don't know. It's funny how it's all clicking together in this episode. This episode really is like, Favreau is working on another level here, and he had like a top-notch director.
Yeah, I'm the sort of rougher aspects of the writing I could easily ignore because the mythic symbolism was so good.
Yeah.
And the rough edges were smoothed by the amazing director who gave the feeling camera even to a puppet and to a man wearing a mask.
Really, really did. Yeah.
We felt emotions.
Great stuff.
From these characters, which is key to excellent Star Wars.
It really was.
Any other thoughts on this amazing episode?
I don't think so. I think I touched on pretty much everything I wanted to say. I love that creature so much. It sort of goes back to George's rough drafts and, I mean,
the secret is,
I love it.
With Odysseus and Polyphemus is that it took brains, not brawn, to defeat Polyphemus, right? So he's tricked, but it doesn't mean that there isn't like a price to pay for that.
Sure. Din
needed Bo to rescue him from the situation because his spirituality alone couldn't save him.
Yeah. It's like, the way you described it is like, when she's got the sword and shield, it's like, it means more than just she's like a badass with a sword. It's like she's
more balanced.
She's got all the balance, like Wonder Woman doing all the trench warfare stuff, and then she sees the baby and she's like, "Oh, baby." Anyway, you can be both. It's nice.
Yeah, and
for all of the above.
Hopefully, you can have a love interest too.
It sure seems like it after this episode. A lot of people picked up on that.
I mean, it's mythically significant what happened. So we'll see if they pick it up. We'll see where they go with things. It certainly feels like Bo-Katan is going to be a big character for this season, but I actually don't know where they're going to go next. I wasn't expecting them to go to the mines of Mandalore until later on in the season after he went on a hunt chase for the IG unit. I was totally set up. I actually thought that it was going to be like one of those and now we have the IG unit memory clip and we go back to the thing. And I thought that was going to be the season. Now I actually literally don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we've been perceived by the eye of the literal mythosaur down in the underworld. So I don't know how you top it, but you kind of have that Chekhov's gun now of the mythosaur is down there. Mm-hmm. And we know that, there is magic in the living waters. And it's this,
the living waters were literally living.
The symbol. Yeah. It's so great. I love it.
It's great. All right. We will be back next week with another episode of Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim. Alex, where can people find you if they're looking for you online?
As long as Twitter remains, I'm at Alex J. Kane, Kane.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is provided by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force: Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, How Rude, Anna Perez, Neil, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, Scott C., and Susan. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. Check out our other channel on YouTube, What the Fiction. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, and our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.